Hello and welcome or welcome back to the channel. My name is Judy and I love travel, history, and finding out what makes people tick. Today we're going to learn a bit about Vincent van Gogh's last year here in Provence, what he accomplished, why he left, and the disastrous result of that decision. Before I begin, I want to advise you that this video will include references to Vincent's mental illness, possible alcoholism and drug use, and suicide, which some people may find disturbing. Any of my other videos might be a better choice for you. If you do suffer from mental illness or symptoms, you do not have to go this alone. Help is available nationwide in the United States. Dial or text 988. Now let's explore Vincent's final year in Provence, which I think was the most productive and in some ways tragic of his life. Today with me, the Armchair Traveler, as your guide. Vincent did fairly well in Paris at first, living with his brother up in Montmartre, meeting the many up-and-coming as well-established impressionists, hobnobbing and partying. However, he soon understood that Paris was just a bit too stimulating for his mental health. One of the saddest things about his life is that he seems to have been aware of his mental problems and to have understood that for the most part, medical science of the day was unable to help him. Self-help it had to be. He was partying too much, smoking too much, drinking too much. It was Vincent's idea to leave Paris, perhaps to put those distractions behind himself. It was his idea to go to Arles, but his decision was strongly influenced by correspondence with his brother Theo. Vincent moved to Arles in February of 1888, seeking a change from the fast-paced life of Paris and hoping to find a brighter, more colorful landscape that would inspire him. He was also drawn to the idea of establishing an artist colony in the south of France, which later led to his attempt to form the Studio of the South. The idea here was that like-minded painters could live and work together, inspiring and supporting one another. He envisioned it as a kind of creative retreat, much like a European equivalent of the Japanese art colonies he admired, a kind of Provençal utopia. This self-portrait, done sometime between December 1887 and January 1888, shows us how Vincent saw himself. In an earlier video, I shared the beginning of Vincent's story. He had moved to Paris and initially thrived there, living with his brother Theo, an art dealer in Montmartre. Vincent mingled with both emerging and established impressionists and people who were to become the post-impression. He engaged in conversation, shared drinks, and absorbed their styles. He painted with a great deal of fervor, creating a prolific body of work. But his joy was fleeting. Vincent's good times were always followed by darker days. Even so, he remained apparently an eternal optimist. He recognized his struggles, understood his illness to some extent, and believed that he could outlast his demons. In the bustling life in Paris, he found the excitement, unfortunately, overwhelming. He turned to heavy drinking, perhaps to numb the pain, possibly of depression, unaware that alcohol was a depressant. His favorite absinthe probably exacerbated those low moments. He realized that medicine in his day offered only limited, if any, help, so he turned to self-help, a practice he had embraced since he was a teenager. Vincent moved fairly often during his life, exploring different careers and experimented with different artistic styles, always in search of something better. He was caught in a cycle of excess, partying too much, smoking too much, drinking too much, only to find himself plunged in despair. In February 1888, Vincent relocated to Arles, seeking relief from the frenetic pace of Paris. He wanted a brighter, warmer, more colorful landscape to inspire his art and planned to establish an artist community in the south of France. Arles had a great deal to offer. Vincent had a lifelong love of rural life, viewing peasants and farmers as noble, spiritually connected to nature. He saw their struggles not just for wealth, but for survival, and perhaps he identified with. The landscapes, fields, people, and small-town charm of Arles resonated with his vision and his notion. The countryside provided an immense amount of scenery, including a river that would inspire his iconic Starry Night over the Rhone, although he didn't paint that while he was living in Arles. Perhaps most importantly, Arles was far more affordable than Paris. Vincent had always been reliant on Theo for financial support, and he needed a place where he could live and create without the burden of high costs. This was Vincent's quest for solace, inspiration, and ultimately, I think, a sense of belonging. In his artist colony, he believed he could surround himself with friends, like-minded people, so he thought, who would mingle and work together. He was to be sadly disappointed in this plan. Vincent was thrilled to have Paul Gauguin join him here at the Yellow House, his artist colony in the South. But we have to wonder how reciprocal that feeling must have been, or even exactly what the feelings were. We do know that Theo Van Gogh was funding everything, not just Vincent's expenses, but Gauguin's as well, for the operation of the colony. Gauguin and Van Gogh had very different personalities and artistic styles. Van Gogh was emotional and impulsive, while Gauguin was far more theoretical and controlled. At first, Van Gogh probably looked to Gauguin for both friendship and artistic validation, but Gauguin wasn't able or willing to provide it, at least not for very long. People who knew Gauguin often described him as arrogant, self-centered, and difficult. He seemed to exploit the people around him, first abandoning his own family, then forming questionable relationships with very young girls in Polynesia. As for his relationship with Van Gogh, was it ever truly close, or was Gauguin just willing to tolerate him for the benefits that accrued? What we do know is that on December 23, 1888, the two artists got into a terrible fight. It's unclear what triggered it. Maybe it was about artistic approaches or Gauguin's plan to possibly leave Provence and return to Paris. Some say Van Gogh actually threatened Gauguin with a razor knife. We do know that both men drank heavily, but again, while Van Gogh was known for being erratic and impulsive, Gauguin was more controlled. Whatever happened that night, and we'll never know the whole truth, we do know that Gauguin left the next day, and Van Gogh, in a mental health crisis, was found bleeding in his room. He had cut off part of one of his own ears. He reportedly wrapped the ear in cloth and delivered it to a woman named Rachel, telling her to keep this object carefully. He was later found unconscious and taken to the hospital. The next day, Gauguin left Arles. As far as I know, Van Gogh never heard from him again. Vincent's ear-slitting episode made the news, and not in a good way. Whatever the truth about the argument and the episode and the visit to the brothel afterwards, perhaps in a not quite drunk enough stupor, he made it back to his bed and was found in a mentally disordered state the next morning, with blood all over. Someone called the police. Vincent was hauled off to the local hospital and patched up, among others, by a young doctor named Felix Ray, shown here. The news got out regarding Vincent's mental health and incidents during his time at Arles. While some of the reports were not extensive and they didn't focus on his artistic contributions, they did reflect what I think were the legitimate concerns of the community regarding both his well-being and theirs. Even in this sad and quite ill state, Vincent continued to paint whatever was available, including 2 views of the hospital in Arles, as well as a self-portrait complete with a bandaged knee. The community had apparently had enough. His yellow house was owned by the city. The citizens petitioned the city government to expel him. Vincent's decision to enter the asylum in Saint-Remy de Provence and seek mental health treatment was primarily influenced not just by his deteriorating mental health, but with the encouragement of Brother Theo himself. In May of 1889, seeking a more stable environment and perhaps honest treatment that would work, Van Gogh voluntarily admitted himself to the Saint-Paul-de-Moselle Asylum in Saint-Remy de Provence. When Vincent admitted himself to the asylum, mental illness in France and every place else was still largely misunderstood. There was a growing scientific interest in the subject. France was actually at the forefront of psychiatry at the time, such as it was, but effective care treatment options were quite limited. Most individuals with mental health issues were placed in asylums, not necessarily for help, but to remove them from society. The institutions focused more on managing the patients than on providing genuine care, much less a cure. Vincent found himself at Saint-Paul-de-Moselle, a former monastery that had been converted into a hospital. Compared to other asylums, it was relatively quiet and somewhat more humane. Unusually for the time, he was allowed to paint, likely due to his mostly calm demeanor, and the staff's recognition of his artistic talent, along with the support of Brother Theo, who then and forever was paying most of the bills. However, Vincent didn't really receive any therapy or medication. The treatment he experienced mostly involved rest, routine, and isolation, occasionally interrupted by the harshness of ice baths, which were intended to shock patients back into reality. During his stay, Vincent had several episodes of severe depression and hallucinations, and yet he also produced some of his most renowned works, including The Irises and The Starry Night. His time at Saint-Remy truly reflects the contradictions of the era, a society beginning to explore the complexities of mental health, yet still deeply fearful and unable to offer any real assistance. If you got better, you basically did it on your own. Despite being gravely ill, Van Gogh continued to experiment with his painting and his technique. He often expressed to brother Theo how challenging it was to depict the night sky. To improve his work, he frequently repainted scenes, trying to capture elements he felt he had missed or hadn't portrayed properly. One of Vincent's most significant paintings from this period is The Starry Night, shown here on the right. It serves as a kind of a follow-up and improvement, perhaps, to an earlier work, Starry Night over the Rhone, which you can see on the top left. Starry Night over the Rhone presents a fairly serene view, showcasing reflections on the river, and comes complete with glowing gas lamps, illuminated houses, and even a couple, perhaps lovers, strolling along the embankment. To me, it seems to brim with life. In contrast, The Starry Night is much more focused on the sky, featuring those swirling stars. You can see, if you look, the hills, the houses, and what I take to be an olive tree prominently displayed in the foreground, but no people that I can see. Was this a reflection of the absence of companions during his time at Saint-Remy de Provence? Did he decide to just concentrate on the problem of portraying the dark and the stars? He had complained to Theo about being lonely in the hospital. Perhaps the absence of people here confirms that. Of his many olive tree paintings, olive trees in a mountainous landscape, shown on the left, may have been intended as a daylight counterpart to The Starry Night. He found olive trees demanding and compelling. In a letter to Theo, he shared his struggle to capture their essence, describing them as old silver, sometimes with more blue in them, sometimes greenish, bronzed, fading white above a soil which is yellow, pink, violet-tinted orange. Very difficult. He felt that the rustle of the olive grove has something very secret in it and immensely old. It's too beautiful for us to dare to paint it or to be able to imagine it. You can see a similar view of the olive grove, a photograph this time on the lower left. Even in the depths of despair and his illness, with Van Gogh picking and choosing what to emphasize and what to minimize, he seemed to try to at least include everything important and leave it visible for our eyes. Perhaps Vincent saw those olive trees. They grow all over the south of France and live for a very long time as his only companions. After about a year, Vincent felt himself to be sufficiently improved that he could leave the asylum. I think he was probably lonely, he missed his brother, and perhaps he realized that he had gotten all he could out of his stay. His time there had been immensely productive, but it was time to move on. He decided, on the advice of brother Theo and another artist, Paul Cézanne, to move to a suburb near Paris called Auvers-Saint-Oise. Adeline was a young teenage daughter of the owner of the inn where Vincent lived when he was in Auvers-sur-Oise. Adeline wrote an account of her interactions with Van Gogh while she was still quite young, but her reminiscences weren't published until much later, in 1947. She gave several additional interviews in the 1950s before she died. She was probably one of the last people living at the time who had actually met and interacted with the artist, although much of what she has to say about his death came from stories she heard from her father. She did not witness it firsthand. She did report him, however, to be a quiet, somewhat contemplative man, one who gave no trouble to his innkeeper and who kept to a very regular schedule. Van Gogh lived at the auberge until his death. During that time, he completed 70 paintings. Vincent was always, as we know, looking for people or places or things to paint. So it's no surprise he would choose the innkeeper's daughter. These 3 portraits were completed during the last months of his life. Adeline reported in her interview that she only sat for him one time and that he was silent, intent, and apparently he must have painted quite quickly. She also said she didn't like the portrait, shown here on the left. He made at least 2 more variations of it. The final portrait here is a girl with an orange, which may have been the daughter of a neighbor, or possibly Adeline's younger sister. Each was a baby at the time. Vincent had moved to Auvers-Saint-Oise, a village near Paris, hoping to be closer to his brother and to receive medical treatment from Dr. Paul Gachet, a physician known for his work with artists. Vincent was looking for a fresh start to aid in his recovery process. Initially, he had a very negative impression of Dr. Gachet. In a letter to Theo, he expressed doubt about the doctor's abilities, suggesting that when one blind man leads another blind man, they both fall into a ditch. Just 2 days later, he wrote to his sister Wilhelmina, stating that he had found a true friend in Dr. Gachet, someone who resembled him both physically and mentally. This sudden change of perspective raises questions. Was it a moment of clarity or a symptom of Vincent's well-documented episodes of what some today might diagnose as rapid cycling bipolar disorder. In rapid cycling, individuals experience 4 or more episodes of mania, hypomania, or depression within a year. And Vincent often experienced even more fluctuation. The opinions of Vincent, Theo, and an eyewitness, little Adeline, about the relationship varied. Vincent described the doctor as caring and kind. After his death, however, Dr. Gachet became owner of several of Vincent's paintings, including the famous portrait of. This connection to Vincent enhanced Gachet's reputation and allowed him to sell some of the artwork substantial sums, benefiting financially from his association with the artist. He likely also attracted more artists as patients. Theo was less enthusiastic, perhaps believing that Gachet, who had actually studied mental illness, was the best man available for the job, but might turn out to be not quite good enough. Just 6 months later, Theo died, leaving behind a wife, an infant, limited finances, and a large collection of paintings that had little immediate value. Theo's wife, Jo Van Gogh, played a crucial role in turning Vincent into a popular artist, also translating all of her husband's letters to and from Vincent, which formed the core of the Van Gogh Museum archives. Little Adeline, the innkeeper's daughter, had a much more negative view, stating in her memoirs quite definitely that Vincent rarely met with the doctor and that the famous Sunday lunches at Gachet's house were fabricated. She claimed the doctor only visited the inn after Vincent's suicide attempt, bandaged the wound, and left without even speaking to him. That raises the question, was this yet another instance of Vincent being abandoned? It's possible that Vincent misinterpreted his relationship with Gachet, much as he had his friendship with Gauguin. Gauguin, in his reflections after Vincent's death, attempted to portray their relationship as one of friendship. By this time, everybody was jumping on the bandwagon, emphasizing their bond as fellow artists. He acknowledged Vincent's passion for art, which contributed to a sense of camaraderie. However, their relationship, as we saw back in Arles, was marked by significant conflict and tension. That makes the notion of friendship somewhat doubtful. Controversy has always surrounded everything about Vincent van Gogh's life and death. The evolution of his style, his mental health struggles, the causes of his problems, even the circumstances of his death have all been topics of discussion since his untimely passing. They've also given rise to a number of conspiracy theories. We know he was a creature of habit, or so Adeline tells us, and yet on that Sunday afternoon, after lunch, he returned to the wheat field, which was quite close to the inn, and something of a departure from his usual routine. Adeline also noted that he didn't return from the field until well after dinner, another departure from the usual schedule. Vincent reportedly shot himself in the chest in that nearby wheat field. He managed to walk back to the inn, still toting his easel and paints, although he arrived quite late in the evening, greeting the innkeeper and making his way upstairs to his room. Again, according to Adeline, her father was sufficiently alarmed that he followed the artist upstairs, took one look, and sent for the local doctor, who was unavailable, and only then for Dr. Gachet. Monsieur Ravoux told Adeline that when he asked, Vincent told him this was a suicide attempt. She was not an eyewitness to the shooting itself or to that conversation. Watching the artist drag himself up the steps was probably the last time she saw him alive. Dr. Gachet was called, arrived, bandaged the wound, and according to little Adeline, who seemed not to care much for the doctor, did not speak a single word to Vincent before leaving. In her memoir and subsequent interviews, she was firm and consistent. The next morning, police officials arrived. In 19th century France, attempted suicide was considered a criminal offense, often leading to prosecution for those who survived. Theo arrived as well, devoted to the end. Van Gogh's death marked a tragic end to a life filled with brilliance and turmoil. His work gained immense recognition posthumously, and he's now celebrated as one of the most influential figures in Western art history. This painting, which is called Tree Roots and Trunks, is generally accepted as a masterpiece of work, and to tell the truth, I can't make heads or tails out of it, except that those green pieces seem to be something growing and alive. I think that's the key observation here, and as always, this is just my amateur opinion. Vincent was interested in life, at least on the day before he shot himself. Something changed between that morning and Sunday afternoon that altered Vincent's perspective of life. Even with all the letters exchanged between him and his brother Theo, and thousands, I suspect, of master's theses and PhD dissertations, I doubt we'll ever fully understand what happened or why. And perhaps it's better that way. Thank you for joining me as we explored Vincent's time in the asylum and his last days in Auvers-Saint-Oise. It's time for us to move on. Join me next time for another adventure with me, the Armchair Traveler, as your guide. Thank you for traveling with me today. This year, we'll be making a grand tour of France, not just the famous cities, although we'll hit them too, but some lesser known gems. The basis of all my French posts is my personal on the ground visits, extending over a period of more than half a century. I took a lot of pictures, I asked a lot of questions, and I tried to write down the answers. Things change, even in a puny human lifetime, and most French cities are considerably older than I am, so a great deal of research goes into each one of these presentations. Most of that work never makes it into the videos except as an incidental reference or a mention. You might wonder what happens to the rest of it. Well, I write it down, and sometimes, if it seems interesting enough, and I admit that is a matter of taste, I write it up and post it separately. If you want to know more, check the description box below. I'll put in links from time to time for more information. Sometimes this will be information I dug up, other times it'll be links to what I hope are honest, reputable sources. In addition, I have a travel blog, a health and wellness blog, because travel is easier if we're healthy, and can be found on Blue Sky and Facebook. The addresses are all to the side of this video. Finally, I have a favor to ask. If you enjoyed my post, please like, subscribe, and share. This will help my channel grow. Thank you, and keep on traveling.